Okay.
How did he get from A to B?
Okay. Anthony Flew was convinced to become a theist, a believer in God, because of what's called the fine-tuning design argument. Modern cosmologists have discovered some pretty amazing things about the origin of the universe and the so-called Big Bang. Taking Big Bang cosmology for granted for the sake of argument, and it's a pretty well-supported theory, it's been noticed by the cosmologists and astronomers that there were certain conditions that existed at the very first instant of the Big Bang, such as the amount of gravity that was there at that very first second, the rate of expansion. I mean, the matter was moving out from that initial explosion at a certain speed. The matter was distributed at certain points in space at that first initial moment, and so on. There are several of these conditions that are called cosmic constants. And every one of these cosmic constants had certain numerical values. There was so much gravity at that first second. There was so much matter at that first second. The matter was moving at a certain speed. And the question is, why did those constants have the numerical values that they actually had rather than some other value? Because it just so happens, and here's the amazing thing, it just so happens that these constants had just the right setting so that the universe that resulted from this Big Bang would be a life-permitting universe. And if those numerical values of these constants had been only slightly different, just slightly different, then the universe that would have resulted would have been absolutely life-prohibiting rather than life-permitting. If the matter had been moving out only slightly faster than it actually was, then the matter would have been moving out so fast enough to keep molecules from forming. And you wouldn't have any stars, no planets, and no life. If the gravity had been just a tiny bit heavier than it actually was, then the Big Bang would have happened, and then we would have had, within a matter of seconds, the Big Crunch. And there wouldn't be any life in that universe. So it seems that the universe at the point of the Big Bang was finely tuned, had just the right settings on these cosmic constants so that the universe that resulted would be one that would prohibit life to exist on this planet.
And you can't use the argument, this popped in my head, you can't use an evolutionary argument at that point and say, well, you know, given enough time, all these possibilities could have occurred and this one just happened to occur, because we're not talking about an amount of time, we're talking about an instantaneous thing that happened.
That's right. And so, but they're really, the people who talk about these things argue that there are really only three possible explanations for this fine-tuning of the universe.
Okay.
One explanation is some kind of necessity, but that explanation is rejected by almost everybody because there's no law of logic that says that those cosmic constants had to have those numerical values. There's no physical law that says they had to have those numerical values either. In fact, the scientists tell us that at the initial point of the Big Bang, all the physical laws break down. So there's no reason why those settings had to be what they were, so there's only two other possibilities. Either it was completely by chance, or it was by intelligent design. And chance is ruled out because of the astronomical numbers that are involved in saying it was a chance occurrence.
Really a mathematical impossibility for it to be occurred by chance.
It would seem so.
Why is intelligent design having such a hard time being presented in the academic world?
I think it's because there are people who have adopted a certain view called methodological naturalism, and they may be multiple motives for why they adopt this methodological naturalism. But I think one major motive is because they want to avoid the conclusion of this argument that the universe was intelligently designed. Methodological naturalism is the view that a scientific explanation has to be a natural explanation, that scientific explanations can only appeal to natural causes. So by definition then, science can't appeal to a supernatural cause. So if the intelligent design movement is right, there's a supernatural cause. And so those who espouse this methodological naturalism believe that this intelligent design theory is not really science.
It seems like, and maybe it isn't, but maybe what that shows us is that science has pretty much come to the end of itself when you go back that far to origins, and it needs to borrow from, let's say, although they would cringe, theology.
Perhaps so, but one thing I say in response to methodological naturalism is that if you really hold this view, I mean, if you're a seeker for truth,
Right.
if you want to know what's true, then the worst view you could hold is methodological naturalism, because you are ruling out, before you ever look at any evidence, at least a possible explanation for the things out there. And that, I think that's a bad epistemology.
Well, you know, when I was getting a master's degree in philosophy at Vanderbilt, I went there hoping to become involved with others in a search for truth, and I quickly found out that that was the least, that wasn't the goal at all. You know, we weren't there to try to find truth. We were there to discuss, you know, you could believe anything, just don't call it the truth. You know, once you called it the truth, you were out the window, you know. It just seemed like, that was one of the things that led me to start reading the Bible, because at least here's something that claims to be true. You know, it seems like the end result of the vast majority of philosophers and philosophies is that truth is not the big issue. You know, it's just a way of thinking or a way of discussing this thing endlessly without ever having to come to some conclusions that I'm accountable to.
Right.
Let's get back to one last thing. We've got about 3 minutes here, and you talked about the going from God to Jesus, and has God spoken? It's logical that he would have used a messenger with miraculous abilities that would supersede nature, and the number one example of that would be the resurrection of Christ. Can you, in 2 minutes and 57 seconds, just kind of point somebody in that direction?
Sure, I'll have to be brief, but I can give you the sketch of an argument. The details will have to be filled out. But there are three facts that historians of almost every theological stripe accept. And the reason they accept these facts is because the historical evidence for these facts is very, very solid. So even liberals and skeptics, atheists, acknowledge that these facts are in fact facts. There's the fact that Jesus' tomb was found empty on the third day after he had been killed. There's the fact that his disciples saw what they at least took to be appearances of Jesus alive again after he had been killed. It's amazing to me that even atheist Bible scholars acknowledge that.
That the disciples actually believed he had risen from the dead.
Not just that, but they saw him alive again.
And that's why they believed.
That's why they believed. That's the third fact. The third fact is they believed he had risen from the dead. So these are three facts that cry out for some kind of explanation. You can try to explain these three things in some naturalistic way, come up with some natural explanation for these things, or you can try to argue, as I will, that the best explanation for these three facts is that God raised Jesus from the dead. All the natural explanations for these facts fall flat. The empty tomb, there's several proposals on the table to explain it naturally. One is that the disciples stole the body. That's why the tomb was empty. But that's really ludicrous, because then you can't explain the other things. You can't explain why they believed he was risen from the dead.
Yeah, they would have been in a position to know it was a lie if it was.
That's right. And we know they weren't lying. They may have been deluded, but they weren't lying because they were willing to die for this belief of theirs. Another is that the Jewish authorities stole the body. But that's even worse, because then when they started preaching the resurrection,
counterproductive,
the Jewish authorities would have produced the body.
Sure.
So these and other natural explanations just don't explain the facts on the table. The appearances, the fact that the disciples saw appearances of Jesus, the natural theory that's often proposed there is hallucination.
Yeah.
They saw some kind of hallucination. But the idea of a mass hallucination, that 500 people saw him alive again at one time, that just won't float.
That's a great miracle too.
That's an even bigger miracle. So that you cannot explain these facts in a naturalistic way. And to my knowledge, there is no naturalistic theory that's taken seriously by anyone today. Now, it's interesting to me, though, that the explanation that God raised Jesus from the dead meets all the criteria for a good explanation.
Sure it does.
It explains the three facts. If God raised Jesus from the dead, it explains why the tomb is empty. It explains why they saw appearances. It explains why they believed he was risen. And it also explains all the facts together, that one hypothesis.
Well, I've got you on the hook for another program now,
All right.
and we'll expand that, and that's what we'll try to do. I think it'd be a great thing to do. So please consider these things. I hope this is a service to you. Somebody called me a television star once, and I thought, no, if you're a star, they pay you to come on. If you pay for the television time yourself, you're not a star. So this isn't about that. It's about trying to help you consider the search for truth. So thanks for watching Church for Skeptics. You have tried to mend your broken heart.